this documentary, I will be taking a look at the history of modern supercars and how far the development has come, from half a decade ago to modern times. And I'll also be interviewing my father, who is fortunate enough to own his own supercar, as he discusses his ownership experience. So what actually defines a supercar? I think a supercar is not only defined by the badge or how fast it is, but by the exotic design, often crazy features, and also the recognisability. Now, of course, the performance and actual make of car are also defining features. However, the supercar is more than what most would assume. A supercar should turn heads and trigger excitement and really be the centre of attention anywhere it's driven. Now, talking more from a technical standpoint, a supercar does have to be extremely fast, and more specifically, not front-engined. Rather, the engine should be mounted in the middle or over the rear axle. Now, for me, a front-engine car such as a Ferrari F12 or an Aston Martin DB11 is a Grand Touring or GT car, purely because of where the engine is mounted, regardless of any other categorization such as performance or appearance. Now, when it inevitably does come to horsepower and top speed, opinions are divided. Some may consider a supercar, in quotation, built in the 80s, such as the Ferrari F40, to no longer live up to the definition of a supercar, as when compared to modern cars, the difference in performance, technology and safety is night and day. Now, on the other hand, others may still consider the F40 a supercar, as it was most definitely a supercar back when it launched in 1987, as it was actually the fastest car in the world at the time, but more on that later. Personally, I consider every car to be placed in the category it was in when it was new. For example, I consider the F40 and even the Lamborghini Miura, which was the first supercar ever made, to still be supercars. In the same way that as in 30 years time, I will still consider the Ferrari F8 Tributo, which is Ferrari's latest mid-engine supercar, to be a supercar when that time comes. So to summarise, a supercar is defined by performance, the mounting of the engine in my opinion, appearance and the recognisability. So now on to the main content of this video, which is the history of modern supercars. So how did it all start? The year is 1966, and a very new and relatively small sports car manufacturer based just east of Modena, Italy, called Lamborghini, has just launched the stunning Miura, the world's first supercar at the world famous Geneva Motor Show. Now, the Miura really shook the automotive industry. It was a huge surprise, especially for Ferrari, and set the mark for performance cars in the future, as the mid-engined rear-wheel drive configuration used by the Miura is still being utilised by manufacturers such as Ferrari and Lamborghini today. The Miura Superveloce, or SV, which means super speed in Italian, literally, features incredible performance figures for the era, packing 380 horsepower from a transversely mounted naturally aspirated V12, which transversely, by the way, means horizontally or sideways, not how a usual engine would be mounted, which by the way is more than most modern cars in terms of horsepower. A 0 to 60 time of 5.7 seconds and an astonishing top speed of 170 miles an hour back in 1966. The Miura had such a big impact that Ferrari responded almost instantly with a car they did not call a Ferrari, even though it was indeed manufactured by Ferrari, specifically the Dino 246 GT. A mid-engine V6 that was sold under the Dino branding because Enzo Ferrari was unhappy placing a V6 in a car with the Ferrari badge, so to please Enzo it would have had to be a V12 like the Miura. Even though Ferrari knew their target, which was the Miura, they were unable to match it in terms of performance, as the Dino could only manage 0 to 60 in 8.2 seconds and a top speed of 146 miles an hour. However, it's still an extremely stunning car to look at, and a true Ferrari classic. A few possible 246 GT customers were confused as to why the cars didn't have Ferrari badging at first, and some were even reluctant to purchase the car due to this. So the dealerships began placing Ferrari badges on the rear bumper, and as a result saw an almost instant rise in sales. Now, moving on to the 1970s, which is what was in my opinion the golden era of supercars, much like it is considered the golden era of Formula 1. Cars like the Lamborghini Countach, the Porsche 911 Turbo and Ferrari Berlinetta Boxer, or BB, began to build on platforms such as the Miura and the Dino, and start to really push the envelope in terms of what was possible performance and styling wise. Lamborghini launched one of the most defining and well-known supercars of all time, the Countach, in 1974, and with its crazy design, scissor doors in later models, and glorious mid-mounted V12, the supercar was redefined. Now, Lamborghini's evolution from Miura to Countach was their biggest of all time in terms of appearance, with the Miura's elegant and almost wise looks disrupted by the Countach arriving on the scene with doors that go up and a huge rear wing on later models that technically does almost nothing in the way of downforce. Now, Porsche launched the 930 Turbo in 1975, and it was the first ever Porsche 911 to be fitted with a turbocharged air-cooled flat-six engine, the same format Porsche uses today, except with an additional turbo, four-wheel drive, which was by the way initiated in the 993 Turbo, and a whole lot more power. The 930 Turbo packs 282 horsepower with a maximum revolutions per minute, or RPM, range of 7,200 RPM, driven through the rear wheels only, via a 4-speed manual gearbox, which in the 4th gear will reach 157 miles per hour, an impressive figure for a Porsche almost half a century old. Now moving on to the 1980s, as we arrive at the 200 mile an hour production car speed record race, where Porsche, in one case unofficial as the car was tuned by RUF, an external company, Ferrari, Lamborghini and Jaguar all released cars capable of 200 miles an hour. The first Porsche I'll be looking at is the 964 tuned by RUF. Technically speaking, this is the first road legal production car to reach 200 miles an hour and is officially named the RUF CTR Yellowbird. It is a limited production 470 horsepower twin turbo flat six engine tuned version of the Porsche 911 964, which reached a speed of 211 miles per hour in 1987 and 213 miles an hour a year later. However, this car was limited production and was not made nut and bolt by Porsche. Many therefore consider this to be the unofficial record holder. Now, the second Porsche I'll be taking a look at is the 1986 959. At the time, this was the fastest car in the world and Porsche's first factory car to achieve 200 miles an hour. Porsche themselves listed the car's top speed as only 197 miles per hour, however it is well known the car is capable of 200 miles an hour, as Porsche often well understate their performance numbers. Now, the 959 was a revolutionary car and well ahead of its time, and also quite the opposite of the F40, which is the next car I'll be looking at. The 959 started development in 1981 as an Ultimate 911 to see how far the envelope could be pushed in terms of ultimate supercar. Helmuth Bott, Porsche chief engineer at the time, was convinced, however, that all-wheel drive could be one way of extending the 911's bloodline into the future, and he set to designing an ultimate 911 that would also adhere to Group B rallying rules. This became true as three modified versions of the 959 competed in and 2-1 the Dakar Rally, which is the most famous rally in the world. In terms of performance, the 959 road car can reach over 200 miles an hour and has a claimed 0 to 60 time of 3.7 seconds, heavily due to the high traction all-wheel drive system. The 959 features a twin-turbo rear-mounted flat-six engine which produces 444 brake horsepower and an array of tech not uncommon in a car of today. Specifically, the 959 has enhanced suspension, 2 electronically adjustable dampers per wheel, one to adjust the triple height setting ground clearance, in modern terms known as lift, and one to control the firmness of the ride, a tyre pressure monitoring system, and even an adjustable rear wing. Even considering the uncommon complexity, the 959 was very comfortable and easy to drive at high speeds. Even 19-year-old tennis star Boris Becker maxed his own 959 on the German Autobahn. It is undoubtedly a classic, which is reflected by the modern asking prices of circa £1 million. Moving on to the F40, and Ferrari officially holds the 200 miles an hour production car speed record with the 1987 F40. Reaching a speed of 201 miles an hour officially. The F40 is my all-time dream car and remains one of the most famous and admired cars of all time for a few reasons. Firstly, the F40 is a Ferrari, which is admirable in itself, and not only is it considered the first production car to reach 200 miles an hour, but it features Ferrari's classic 5-speed gated manual transmission, no driver aids aside from a limited slip differential, and an old-style twin-turbo V8 that famously only gives you circa 150 horsepower until you reach around 3,500 RPM. Then you're hit with an extra 450 horsepower due to the turbos having spooled up and kicked in. To add to this, the F40 was the last Ferrari that's production was overseen by Enzo Ferrari, who was Mr. Ferrari himself. All of these factors put together are the reason for the F40's rise in value over the years, with the F40 now having appreciated to anywhere between 1 million and close to £2 million, depending on mileage, which for the F40 is a huge value affecting factor. The F40 then is the definition of a classic Ferrari. Now, moving on to Lamborghini. The Diablo was Lamborghini's first take at the 200 miles an hour supercar. It was produced from 1990 to 2001, hit a top speed of 202 miles an hour, and was the last V12 Lamborghini to be solely offered with a manual gearbox. The Diablo was also the last Lamborghini ever to be manufactured completely in-house, except for some of the later cars, with the Murcielago and other future models being assisted in production by the Audi VW Group, Lamborghini's new owners since 1998. With the Diablo comes great history, it twice being the predecessor of the Miura. The Diablo is the Italian company's third attempt at the mid-engine V12 formula. With its enormous and striking presence on the road, the Diablo cannot be missed. It is a classic example of a 90s supercar. The next car I will be discussing is the Jaguar XJ220, which was Britain's attempt at breaking the 200 miles an hour barrier. However, behind the speed in excess of 200 miles an hour and the appreciation associated with such an achievement, the XJ220 was also considered a huge disappointment by many. Now, the prototype was unveiled at the 1988 Birmingham Motor Show just hours after it finished being built and promised four-wheel drive, a naturally aspirated V12 with a top speed of 220 miles an hour, hence the name, and scissor doors like a Lamborghini. The XJ220 was also intended for Group B racing and was never intended to be sold to the public. However, when the car was unveiled, it attracted a lot of unexpected attention, resulting in Jaguar officially launching the XJ220 in 1989 with a price tag of £290,000 and a deposit of £50,000 needed. Now, this is actually up to 10 times what Ferrari ask for a deposit for one of their new cars today. Despite the high asking price, Jaguar attracted over 1,000 potential buyers. However, behind the scenes, a logistical nightmare was unfolding. The XJ220 was fast approaching an actual production cost of £470,000, and worse still, technical issues arose, meaning their promised four-wheel drive system would be ditched in favour of a much simpler and crucially much lighter rear-wheel drive layout. But the big disappointment for many was the engine. The XJ220 ended up with half the cylinders promised, with a measly 3.5 litre twin-turbo V6. To add to this, the XJ220 never reached a top speed of 220 miles an hour, instead only reaching 217 miles an hour, yet was still officially the fastest car in the world until beaten by the incredible McLaren F1, which is the next car I'll be looking at. Now, the McLaren F1 is undoubtedly one of the most impressive cars ever made, reaching speeds in excess of 240 miles an hour back in the early 90s. It was easily the fastest car in the world and would maintain that title until stolen by the Bugatti Veyron in 2005. There are numerous reasons aside from pure speed and performance that makes the F1 truly incredible. For example, the rather fitting name, and I quote, was purely Formula 1 technology applied to a road car, according to the car's designer Gordon Murray. Now, Murray explained that he wanted the F1 to be as much like a Formula 1 car as possible. Specifically, the F1 would seat one driver and one passenger either side of the driver. Now, the F1 also utilises ram intake pressure that forces air into the engine, just like on Formula 1 cars. This feature would enable the F1 to hit the rev limiter during its top speed runs, achieving an astonishing top speed of 242 miles an hour. It is known that Murray was able to achieve such success with the F1 because of his background in racing cars, which he simply applied to the McLaren F1. Now, neither Murray nor McLaren themselves had any specific performance goals in mind. They simply had an understanding it would be very fast. They also did not plan in advance the F1's unheard of asking price of £540,000. Remembering this was in the early 90s, the equivalent, according to the Bank of England, of £1.1 million in today's money. Nowadays, though, you can expect to pay roughly £15 million for a good example. And I personally know of a sale of £20 million for an incredibly rare 1 of 10 McLaren F1 GTR Longtail, the track-only Le Mans winning racer. These prices are all the evidence needed, really, to suggest the car's rarity and credibility. Now, getting into some more technical details, the F1 is powered by an astonishing naturally aspirated 6.1 litre V12, which produces 618 brake horsepower paired to a 6-speed manual gearbox and features dihedral or butterfly doors as they're also known, adding flamboyancy to the whole experience with a top speed of over 240 miles an hour and a 0 to 60 time of 3.7 seconds, which for a 28-year-old car with a manual gearbox is incredibly fast. Now, as if the insane speed figures or outlandish doors weren't enough, the F1 must probably have the most beautiful engine bay of any car ever, as it is plated with 16 grams of pure gold in order to protect the fuel cell from extreme temperatures of the V12 engine. Now moving on to the 2000s with the Lamborghini Murcielago SV and Ferrari 599 GTO. The Lamborghini Murcielago SV is probably one of the best examples of a supercar there will ever be. Ridiculously expensive at £270,000 list price when new, almost 2 meters wide, a naturally aspirated mid-engine V12, scissor doors and a huge rear wing. The SV is the long-awaited successor to the Diablo SV, Lamborghini's precursor top-of-the-range V12 supercar. It also has the performance to back up the insane presence and looks, with 663 brake horsepower, 0 to 60 time of 3.2 seconds, and a top speed of 212 miles an hour without that huge rear wing. Considering the huge size and engine, the SV is actually light too, weighing at just over 1600 kilograms thanks to the intensive use of carbon fibre and other light materials. It is apparently a huge inconvenience to drive and hugely impractical though, taking up all of a British B road at nearly 2 meters wide and is known as cumbersome, although an improvement on the regular Murcielago, the LP640. Speaking of improvements over the standard car, the SV has more power and less weight, the standard formula for a special edition performance supercar. Now, the Ferrari 599 GTO is often considered the competitor of the SV. However, to me, it's actually a slight disappointment, and the SV, well, that's in a completely different league. Now, I'm disagreeing with many in stating this, however, I feel the 599 GTO was never worthy of the legendary GTO badge. Previously, the GTO badging had only been fitted to the 250 GTO, one of the greatest cars of all time and by far the most expensive car ever sold at auction, and the 288 GTO, Ferrari's mid-engine hypercar of the 80s, both incredibly special cars, which is why I believe Ferrari are doing themselves a disservice in applying the GTO badge to the special edition 599, which, in my opinion, isn't that special at all. Though, it must be said, the 599 GTO is still an incredible car. It has a 6-litre naturally aspirated V12 producing 661 brake horsepower, costed £299,300 when new in 2011, and can hit a top speed of 208 miles an hour, which is still very fast, however it loses to the SV. Over the standard car, the 599 GTB, the GTO boasts new springs, wheels, dampers, electronic systems, carbon ceramic brakes and new tyres. In Ferrari's own words, the GTO was designed to be nervous instead of easy to drive, and this really shows as the GTO is known to be a handful, having technically the worst scenario for braking traction. 600 plus brake horsepower, a heavy engine over the front axle making the rear of the car light, and rear wheel drive only. However, the GTO came through, beating Ferrari's own lap record of their own Ferrari test track in Fiorano, Italy, proving their upgrades weren't all for show. Now, the next cars I'll be discussing are known as the hypercar Holy Trinity: the Ferrari LaFerrari, Porsche 918 Spider and McLaren P1, all extremely fast and all are powered by hybrid power plants, i.e. a blend of combustion engine and an electric motor. Firstly, the LaFerrari. The LaFerrari is one of Ferrari's most popular and well-known cars ever built, and due to the looks and sound it makes, it is in my opinion one of the most striking too. Now, being a hybrid, it is powered by an enormous 6.3 litre naturally aspirated V12, which when matched to its electric motor, produces a combined horsepower of 950 bhp, going to the rear wheels only, more than 300 more than the McLaren F1 by the way, and the coupe costed £1 million when new. The LaFerrari does 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds given conditions are perfect, and is capable of 220 miles an hour. Moving on to Porsche with the 918 Spider. The Porsche 918 Spider is also classed within the hypercar Holy Trinity, and it just may be the world's most complete hypercar ever. The 918 is again a hybrid and therefore features a 4.6 litre naturally aspirated V8 combustion engine combined with 2 electric motors, which in turn produce 875 brake horsepower, 75 less than the LaFerrari, however arguably much more usable, seeing as the 918 is 4-wheel drive as opposed to the LaFerrari, which is rear-wheel drive only. The 918 is capable of 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds and a top speed of 214 miles per hour. Porsche manufactured 918 units in total, meaning that whilst not as exclusive as the LaFerrari, the 918 is by no means common and was originally priced at £781,000 including tax, and can be picked up on the UK market for not too much more than that today. Now moving on to McLaren with the P1. So the McLaren P1, not to be confused with the F1, which is the car it succeeded, is McLaren's take on the hybrid hypercar and makes up the final car in the hypercar Holy Trinity, costing £866,000 when new and producing 903 brake horsepower from a 3.8 litre twin-turbo V8 combined with an electric motor, which drives the rear wheels only. Now the P1 can do 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds and will accelerate onto a top speed of 217 miles per hour. Now every McLaren road car since the F1 has butterfly or dihedral doors, with the sole exception of the Elva, which is McLaren's roofless Grand Tourer, which adds to the excitement and presence of the P1 when entering or exiting the car, which when paired with the adjustable rear wing that also doubles up as an air brake under heavy braking, really makes the P1 unmissable and really stand out. Now, an interesting fact about the adjustable rear wing is that after achieving a certain speed, instead of continuing to rise, which will produce more downforce, the wing will actually begin to lower in order to reduce the pressure on the rear of the car, which, if not done so, will mean the force on the rear wheels will become so great that it would actually break the suspension. Now, moving on to modern times and 2021 and beyond, with the McLaren Artura and Ferrari SF90. To offer some context on the near future of supercars, here is a look at the brand new hybrid McLaren Artura. The Artura is the start of what will be a new direction for supercars, leading up to the unfortunate, for petrolheads such as myself, ban of the sale of brand new combustion engine vehicles by 2030. Now, McLaren have always been about innovating and pushing the boundaries with their road cars and Formula 1 cars, and this is very evident when you take a look at the recent models of car, such as from the past 10 years. McLaren launched the MP4-12C in the early 2010s, which featured the exact same format twin-turbo engine you'll find in every single other McLaren road car up until the Artura, such as the 2017 720S or McLaren Senna from December of the same year, except every model of McLaren has a different output from that engine format. Now, this is where many people, myself included, may say that using the same engine for every car isn't exciting and gets old very quickly, especially considering the engine is turbocharged, which heavily removes the sound from the V8, which makes most McLaren models out there emotionless to drive, except for maybe the P1 or 650S. Now, the reason turbocharging an engine detracts sound is because turbochargers run directly off the exhaust system, not the engine, which subtracts the noise and heart and soul from a supercar. Now, to add to this, McLaren don't exactly have a good customer service reputation due to their lack of infrastructure because of the extreme ratio of cars produced per customer, meaning McLaren have overproduced their cars, paired with cars often being extremely unreliable in many ways and even catching fire on a few occasions. All of this means values of their cars are driven down on the second-hand market, often losing over £100,000 of equity in the space of only a few years, causing their reputation to only worsen. The Artura, though, is supposed to be a new step for McLaren and a step into the future at that, as well as an opportunity to try something completely different and turn a new page. The Artura's sci-fi type looks and modern design, paired with a new hybrid powertrain consisting of an all-new twin-turbo V6 matched to an electric motor, means the Artura will be propelled to 60 miles an hour in 3 seconds, all the way to a top speed of 205 miles an hour. The interior has also undergone a futuristic refurbishment and is also completely new. Moving on to the Ferrari SF90. Now, the SF90 is Ferrari's latest example of an all-out, top-of-the-range supercar. Insane performance, ridiculous price, and stunning appearance. However, it is very different to the car it succeeds, which is the LaFerrari. Firstly, the SF90 is not a limited production car, unlike the LaFerrari, which was very limited. Yes, you probably won't be able to walk into a Ferrari dealer and be able to buy one just like that. However, due to the availability that will make up the SF90, it will definitely be easier to get your hands on one over the LaFerrari, which you would have had multiple lower-end Ferraris in order to even potentially get on the list to purchase one, as it was so special. Secondly, the SF90 has a very different powertrain to the LaFerrari, which is where it aligns with the McLaren Artura and the future of supercars. Now, the SF90 and Artura can't be directly compared, as the SF90 is much faster than the Artura and offers more performance in general. However, what can be said is that they are both definitely looking forwards, not back, meaning the SF92 has a hybrid powertrain in the form of a twin-turbo V8 paired with 3 electric motors, which in total produces 1,000 horsepower, 50 more than the LaFerrari and the same as the Bugatti Veyron, however weighing several hundred kilograms less than the Veyron. This means that with the help of four-wheel drive, the SF90, named SF90, SF means Scuderia Ferrari, and they're celebrating their 90th anniversary when it launched, can achieve 0 to 60 in just 2.4 seconds and all the way to a top speed of 211 miles per hour. Now, it also costs £376,000 without options, so with a good spec you're probably looking at closer to £500,000, so not exactly cheap. Specifically, this is the most expensive standard production Ferrari ever. The supercar revolution of less emissions, less emotion, and in turn less driver involvement has been a long time coming. And there has been evidence of such in cars of the last decade, where antisocial, naturally aspirated engine from brands such as Ferrari have been replaced with environmentally friendly twin-turbo engines in order to satisfy new emissions regulations, which only means the supercar is becoming more and more distant from its oldest relative, the Miura, as time goes on. To many people, cars like the Miura are what a supercar should be. Just enough power, a manual gearbox, over the top and yet extremely elegant design, and the ability to turn heads at every opportunity. And now, it likely won't be long until cars like this won't even be road legal anymore. Now, to end on a more positive note, here is an interview with my father, who is fortunate enough to own his own Ferrari 458 Spider, as he discusses his ownership experience so far.
So you can see here we have my 2015 late September build Ferrari 458 Spider. It's in Rosso Corsa with Nero interior, and it's very highly optioned. A lot of carbon fibre vents, the carbon fibre rev counter surround, and also the centre console. Now the centre console on the car is specially optioned in carbon fibre. Got things like carbon fibre sill kick plates, carbon fibre back plate to the actual car, the B pillars in carbon fibre, and various other aspects. This is a very highly optioned 2015 car. So one of the last 458s that actually rolled off the production line. So it could not be any newer, really. The car is around 562 brake horsepower, 0 to 62 speeds around 3.2, 3.4 seconds, but it's very fast. You ain't going to want it to be much faster. Top end is around 200 miles an hour, but you wouldn't want anything faster than this. It is very, very performant, fantastic car, as you can imagine. You know, it's one of the definitive performance cars that you could purchase at the time and still is now. So we bought the car in 2020, in October 2020. Because we had the winter coming forward, it was really a late year purchase in 2020, and it went straight into storage. But I buy into storage, into the garage for winter storage, and it was stored for 6 months. Very worrying as well to some extent, the car not being started for 6 months. You've got a performance car, you know, with no oil moving around the actual engine. So, you know, the first start was actually quite tentative, but it fired up first time after the winter storage, no problems whatsoever. Anybody's performance car, as you can imagine, to purchase a performance car is a special, very special moment indeed. But to be able to be fortunate enough to be able to purchase a Ferrari is exceptional, and something I'd only dreamed about. By the way, the colour Rosso Corsa is classed as resale red, because everybody wants Ferrari red, and that is the Ferrari red colour, Rosso Corsa. So I was very fortunate to be able to buy the car. I got a very good deal on the car as well. I bought it at the right time as well. So everything pretty much lined up. But yeah, fantastic experience. And of course, buying a Ferrari, for anybody buying a Ferrari, it's a definitive moment in your life. It's a level of success. It means you've achieved, although to be honest, it was hard work to get to it. You don't suddenly feel, yeah, I've got there. It's just something that comes along the way, and you're just very fortunate to be able to purchase it. And I'm not a wealthy person, so it was a hard sought asset, a hard sought purchase, and you know, something that's expensive for me to own. So, you know, it's like a lot of people actually who own Ferraris, unlike the perception, a lot of people who own Ferraris actually aren't that wealthy. Some are exceptionally wealthy, but a lot aren't, and it's a hard thing to achieve. I go through many phases with it, being terrified because of the value of it. And when I say being terrified, I mean driving it in case you have an accident. Obviously the car is so performant. Being terrified because of value drops, etc. Not terrified per se, but worried about, you know, if it drops significantly in value because so much money is tied up in it. Also, exhilaration, driving it. Obviously it's a fantastic thing to own. It's a fantastic thing to know that you own that and it exists in your garage. So you have those moments when you go into the garage and you just look at the car. Also, you know, great positive aspects, as I said, from driving the car. Obviously a feeling of exhilaration when you're actually in the car, from the acceleration and just from the actual sense of ownership of the car and being in the car, the feeling of the car, the smell of the car, the ambience in the car, the look of the car, everything about it just is fantastic. It's a beautiful thing to own. Fear also comes though from the way people react to the car. We've had some very positive reactions, as you can imagine, but also some surprisingly very negative reactions. Now, I don't know if that's because of the COVID environment we're in at the moment. If it's worsened by the COVID environment probably is. But some very unpleasant, very, very nasty reactions to the car as well. And obviously there's a worry that people are going to react in an aggressive manner to the car and cause damage. At the moment, it's only been verbal and gestures, but obviously that's not a very pleasant thing to have. But I guess it's part of the ownership. The biggest difference in ownership when you compare it to my previous car, the Porsche 993S, well, the 993S was a classic car, so it wasn't so much about speed, although the top end is quite fast still, about 165, 170 miles an hour. Still a very fast car, not very fast accelerating to that speed compared to modern times, but at the time it was. Beautiful classic car, it was immaculate, a great feeling of ownership as well, great feeling of exhilaration, but not so much from speed, but from the ambience of being in the car and the classic interior of the car and the smell of the leather. Obviously the look of the car, the classic lines of the car. The 993 is like the definitive air-cooled 911 to own, the last of the air-cooled. So a beautiful thing to own, and I owned that car for 12 years. But when you compare it to the Ferrari 458, the 458 is totally different, totally different ownership feelings. The 458 is exhilaration. Totally exhilaration. Also you get the ambience, as I said before, the ambience of the interior, the ambience of the car, the presence of the car. It's a lot bigger than the 993, and with if you think about the sounds, the 993 had the air-cooled sound, so it had no water jacket, so it's a very raw sounding engine, which the 993s and all air-cooled 911s are well known for. With regards to the 458, it's a totally different experience. You know, the 458, instead of having a boxer engine, it's got a V8 and it's got a flat plane crank V8, and it revs to 9,000 RPM. The sound of it is just intoxicating. You know, it howls like an F1 car. It's just incredible. And of course the performance is just incredible to go with it. So not only do you get the performance, but you get the sound. So you've got the comparison there with the last of the air-cooled 911 to the last of the naturally aspirated V8. Very, very different, chalk and cheese, and fantastic things to own, but for many different reasons, and a vastly different ownership experience. The most definitive ownership experience or moment for me has got to be actually picking up the car. Well, there was two really, if I can have two, but I'll say the first one was actually making the decision and cutting the deal to actually purchase the car. But the key one was actually picking the car up, the actual reveal of the car when I was collecting the car, and obviously the drive home, you know, knowing it was my car. And when we made the decision to purchase the car, and when the car was then taken away, obviously we were looking at the car, and I was cutting a deal with the salesman to procure the car. And then when that decision was made, and when I put the deposit down and the car was driven away, I said to my son, "That's our car, Jacob." And you know, he was like, had a nervous laugh, because you could see it was the realization with him as well that, Christ, we've just bought a Ferrari. You know, it's like a dream car. It's probably the only Ferrari I'll ever own. But what an experience. So they had a collection day. That was the key experience for me. The car means many things to me. It's an asset, so I look at it as something that hopefully is going to go up in value, and already has gone up in value since I purchased it. There's a lot of money tied up in the car. It's got to be said, it's a status symbol to some level. I mean, to me, I don't feel it's a status symbol. I don't feel that I've achieved, because I've just been working hard all my life. I'm a working class individual. I work as a technical consultant, and you know, I've worked hard all my life, and I'm still working, you know, into my latter part of my age. So it's not like I can suddenly retire and sit back on my laurels. It's far from it, you know. So there is a level of status symbol about it, but not really aggressively on that side. It's just, I guess, other people would perceive it as a status symbol, hence the negative expressions we get. It's definitely a level of achievement. It was a big goal for me for many years to own my own Ferrari, but I never thought that it would happen, and then I thought it might happen, and then there was a perception it wouldn't happen. So that is a fantastic achievement. It's a fantastic level of achievement, and I guess that experience was a lot greater and a lot more intense for me than a lot of other people who are wealthy, because it wasn't easy for me to buy it. It was very hard. Therefore, it took a great achievement, and therefore it was the actual ownership experience was more emphasised. The purchase experience was more emphasised because it was hard to come by. I remember speaking to the salesman about when we actually decided to purchase the car, and the salesman told me that many people actually come through and they're buying loads of these supercars, and they're so numb to it now, and they actually say to them, well, you don't seem very excited, and they say, yeah, I really want to be excited, but I just can't be because they've done it so many times. I think, well, isn't that a sad place to be, where you're purchasing a car of this sort of level of quality, and you're not excited over it because you've done it so many times. That certainly wasn't the way for me, of course. I was very excited. It was a fantastic experience.